The warehouse smelled like rusted metal and forgotten violence. I shouldn't have been here. Every rational thought screamed that walking through those massive steel doors was signing my own death warrant. But desperation drowns out reason, especially when your brother's life hangs in the balance and you're the only rope he has left. Marcus owed $300,000 to Dominic Russo. That number had consumed my every waking thought for the past week. $300,000 to the most powerful crime boss on the East Coast, a man whose name was whispered in hushed, fearful tones across every neighborhood from here to the Canadian border. A man who didn't accept payment plans or negotiate terms. A man who collected debts in blood and suffering. My footsteps echoed against the concrete floor as I walked deeper into the warehouse, the sound pathetically lonely in the vast industrial space. High ceilings disappeared into shadow. Industrial lighting cast everything in sickly yellow. Crates were stacked haphazardly along the walls, and I realized with cold horror that they probably transported things, or people, someone wanted hidden. Then I saw him. He was sitting behind a mahogany desk that looked completely out of place in this industrial nightmare. The desk belonged in a penthouse, in some luxury office overlooking the city. Not here, not in a warehouse that reeked of criminal enterprise. But the man sitting behind it commanded the space completely. Dominic Russo looked nothing like I'd expected. I'd imagined someone larger, more obviously menacing, someone whose evil radiated outward like heat from a furnace. Instead, he was almost elegant. His charcoal suit was tailored to perfection, his white shirt crisp and immaculate, his silk tie the color of midnight. His dark hair was slicked back with meticulous precision, but his face stopped my breath entirely. He couldn't have been more than 35. His features were almost too perfect to be real, designed in some laboratory to be devastatingly attractive. Sharp jaw, prominent cheekbones, aristocratic nose, full sensual lips, flawless skin. He looked like he should be modeling for expensive cologne advertisements, not running a criminal empire from a warehouse. Then his eyes opened, and I understood why he was so dangerous. Black ice. That's what his eyes were. Cold. Endless. Absolutely without mercy. They swept over me with clinical precision, cataloging every detail, filing away information for future use. Those eyes had seen atrocities. Those eyes had ordered deaths without flinching. Those eyes belonged to someone for whom human life was merely another commodity. "Isabella Bennett," he said, his voice smooth as honey poured over razors. "Sister of Marcus. Come to negotiate, I assume." I stepped closer, projecting confidence I didn't possess. My heart hammered so violently I thought it might break through my ribs. My palms were slick with sweat, my mouth impossibly dry. "Yes," I managed. "My brother made a mistake. I have savings. I have a job. I can make monthly payments, whatever you need." Dominic leaned back in his chair, and it creaked under his weight. 6 men flanked him, massive and scarred, built from violence and darkness, but their attention wasn't on me. It was entirely on their boss, waiting for direction, ready to execute whatever he commanded. "Your brother's debt is now $472,000, Dominic said conversationally, as if we were discussing weather. "Interest and late fees. At your salary, even $2,000 monthly would devastate you financially. You'd need over 20 years to repay it, assuming you never missed a single payment." My stomach dropped. 20 years was a prison sentence. 20 years was slavery. "Then what do you want?" I asked desperately. Dominic stood, unfolding from behind the desk with predatory grace. He was tall, well over 6 feet, and he moved like controlled violence, every muscle a weapon perfected through years of use. He came around the desk and leaned against it, crossing his arms. "Your brother says you're intelligent," he said, studying me with those merciless eyes. "Loyal. You'd do anything for family. He also mentioned you're stubborn, impulsive, speak without thinking." He tilted his head. "Accurate? I don't see how that's relevant," I replied, sharper than intended. One of the men shifted, his hand moving toward his jacket, but Dominic raised his hand, a small, nearly invisible gesture, and the man stopped immediately. The power dynamic was crystal clear. Dominic was authority incarnate. Everyone else was merely an extension of his will. "I'm making you an offer," Dominic said, tone deceptively casual. "I don't make offers twice, and I don't negotiate. Accept what I'm about to propose, or your brother's debt grows $5,000 weekly until he can no longer survive. Understand?" I I nodded numbly. "You work for me," he continued. "Personal assistant. 7 days weekly, whatever hours I require. 6 months, full employment. After 6 months, your brother's debt is completely forgiven. Erased. He's free. 6 months. Impossibly long and impossibly short simultaneously. I could survive almost anything for 6 months. What kind of work? I asked carefully. Nothing illegal, Dominic said, the lie smooth and practiced. Nothing violent. Nothing that will harm you physically. You'll manage my schedule, handle correspondence, organize my affairs, complete discretion, intelligence, and obedience. Those are the only requirements. It was obviously a lie. Working for Dominic Russo would involve illegal things, dangerous things, but I didn't have a choice. My brother's life depended on saying yes. I accept, I heard myself say. I'll do it. Dominic smiled then, and it was the most terrifying expression I'd ever witnessed. Not cruel or aggressive, but suggesting he'd known all along that I would accept. Like he'd orchestrated this perfectly, and my agreement was simply the inevitable conclusion. Excellent, he said smoothly. Start Monday. 7 a.m. My driver collects you. Pack for extended stays. You'll stay at my penthouse during the week. He gestured toward the exit. We're done. My men will see you out. As they escorted me toward the door, a massive guy with a scar running down his left cheek leaned down and whispered, "You just made a deal with the devil, girl. I hope you know what you're getting into." I didn't. I had absolutely no idea what I was about to walk into. Monday morning arrived too quickly. The black SUV with tinted windows pulled up at my apartment building at precisely 7 a.m., sleek and expensive and intimidating. I climbed inside with my small bag, my heart already beginning its panicked rhythm. The car smelled like expensive leather and cologne. Dominic's cologne, I realized. It clung to the interior like a ghost, warning me of what was coming. The penthouse was on the 45th floor of a building in the financial district, the kind of place where old money mixed with new power. When the private elevator doors opened directly into Dominic's personal space, I stopped breathing entirely. The apartment was enormous. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a view of the entire city stretched below us like a conquered kingdom. The furniture was minimalist, clearly chosen by someone with discerning taste and unlimited funds. Artwork on the walls looked like museum pieces. Everything screamed wealth, power, and controlled elegance. And there, standing in the middle of it all, was Dominic. He wore a white dress shirt with the sleeves rolled up to his elbows, revealing forearms that spoke to considerable time spent in physical training. His dark eyes swept over me with that same assessing gaze I'd experienced in the warehouse, cataloging everything, filing away details. "Welcome to your new life, Isabella," he said quietly. "For the next 6 months, this is your home. Your room is through there." He gestured toward a hallway. "Third door on the left. Get settled. We have considerable work to do." That first week was overwhelming. Dominic had an incredibly complex life. Business meetings ran into late hours of the night. Conference calls connected him with people in different time zones. Paperwork multiplied regardless of how much I processed. I discovered he was far more than just a crime boss. He owned legitimate businesses, real estate holdings, an import-export company, restaurants scattered throughout the city. But he also had a dark side carefully compartmentalized from his legitimate operations. Men would arrive at odd hours with encrypted phones and hushed conversations. Money would appear and disappear in transactions I wasn't supposed to understand. Coded phrases and knowing looks suggested violence and danger existed just beneath the surface. What surprised me most was his kindness. He never raised his voice. He never made inappropriate advances. He treated me with professional courtesy that was almost disarming in its normality. It was like he deliberately showed me that he could be civil, that the dangerous man from the warehouse wasn't his default state. By the second week, I'd fallen into routine. Wake at 6 a.m. I'd prepare breakfast for both of us, review his schedule, sort correspondence. We'd eat together, and he'd brief me on the day's requirements. Then he'd disappear into his office or leave for meetings, and I'd manage the administrative details of his life. Evenings were different. After formal business concluded, he'd emerge from his office looking tired and worn, the cold efficiency dropping away to reveal something more human underneath. We'd have dinner together on the balcony overlooking the city, and he'd actually talk to me, not as an employee, but as a person. He told me about his childhood, about poverty and desperation and watching his mother suffer. He told me about decisions he'd made that he regretted. He told me about the loneliness that came with absolute power, the way everyone feared him or wanted something from him, but nobody actually knew him. I found myself developing feelings for him that I absolutely shouldn't have developed. He was dangerous. He was a criminal. He was everything I should avoid. But he was also intelligent, thoughtful, capable of genuine vulnerability when he let his guard down. It was during one of these vulnerable moments that I made my catastrophic mistake. We were sitting on the balcony, overlooking the city lights, beginning to twinkle in the gathering darkness. Dominic was telling me about a business deal he was considering, his words flowing naturally, his expression thoughtful rather than menacing. I was struck by the absolute contradiction between what I'd been told about him and what I was experiencing. He looked beautiful in the soft light. His features were relaxed, almost peaceful. The coldness in his eyes had thawed slightly. He looked young and almost innocent, like someone who hadn't spent years building an empire on violence and fear. "You know," I said impulsively, words tumbling out before I could stop them, "everyone talks about how terrifying you are, how ruthless and cruel and absolutely without mercy." I paused, studying his face in the soft light. "But they never mention how beautiful you are, how impossibly pretty. It doesn't match the reputation at all." Dominic froze mid-sip of his wine. I watched as his entire body went rigid, as the warmth that had been building between us evaporated like morning dew under harsh sun. "What did you just call me?" His voice was dangerously quiet. My stomach dropped. I realized I'd made a catastrophic error. "I just meant that," I started, but he held up his hand. "Pretty?" His eyes had changed entirely. The thaw reversed instantly. The ice returned, colder and sharper than before. "You accepted employment to save your brother's life, and now you're insulting me on my own balcony?" "It's not an insult," I tried to clarify, but my voice shook. "It's just an observation. You're objectively attractive and—" "Stand up," he commanded, and something in his tone made it absolutely clear this wasn't a request. I stood, my legs trembling, as Dominic rose from his chair with fluid, predatory grace. He stepped closer, close enough that I could smell his cologne, something expensive and dark, close enough that I could feel the heat radiating from his body. "Let me explain something to you, Isabella," he said quietly, his voice carrying more threat than if he'd been screaming. "I am not pretty. I am not cute. I am not any of the soft, delicate things that word implies. I am dangerous. I am powerful. I am a man who can end anyone in this city with a single word. And you just called me pretty, which means you don't understand anything about the world you've entered." He stepped even closer, and I felt my breath catch. Dominic didn't touch me that night, though I half expected him to. Instead, he simply stared at me with those cold obsidian eyes for what felt like an eternity before turning away. "Go to your room," he said quietly. "Tomorrow night, I'm hosting a meeting with my inner circle, the most powerful men in this organization. You're going to attend, you're going to observe, and if you perform adequately, perhaps I'll consider letting your brother continue breathing." The implication was clear. I'd crossed a line, and now I was going to pay the price. The next day was torture. I spent every minute wondering what the evening would bring, imagining worst-case scenarios, trying to figure out how I could possibly salvage the situation I'd created. I'd called Dominic Russo pretty. I'd insulted the most powerful crime boss in the city to his face. I'd done something catastrophically stupid, and now I was going to face consequences I couldn't predict. Around 5 in the afternoon, Dominic emerged from his office and told me to change into formal attire. I found a black dress in my room. Expensive, elegant, clearly purchased specifically for this moment. I styled my hair carefully, applied minimal makeup, trying to look professional and invisible simultaneously. By 7 o'clock, men began arriving at the penthouse. They came in small groups, greeting each other with handshakes and nods, moving into the main living space with the casual authority of people accustomed to power. These were dangerous men. I could see it in the way they carried themselves, in the scars some of them wore proudly, in the cold intelligence behind their eyes. Dominic introduced me to them with calculated precision. "Gentlemen, this is Isabella. She's my new personal assistant. She'll be handling administrative details and ensuring your comfort this evening. Treat her with respect." The way he said it made clear that any man who disrespected me would face consequences so severe they didn't need to be stated explicitly. Still, I felt their eyes on me, assessing, curious. wondering what my relationship to Dominic actually was. I moved through the evening serving drinks, taking notes, keeping myself invisible. I watched how Dominic conducted business. He wasn't loud or aggressive. He was quiet, deliberate, measuring. Every word carried weight. Every man in that room hung on his every statement. Around midnight, after the meeting concluded and the men had left, Dominic found me in the kitchen washing glasses. He was quiet for a moment, just watching me work. "You did well tonight," he said finally. "You were invisible when you needed to be, and present when you needed to be. That's a difficult balance to achieve." I didn't respond, unsure what he wanted from me. "Come with me," he said, and I followed him to his office. He gestured toward the leather chair across from his desk. "Sit." I sat, my heart beginning its familiar panicked rhythm. "I need to teach you something," Dominic said, settling into his own chair. "A lesson about respect, about hierarchy, about understanding the difference between observation and insult." He leaned forward slightly. "You called me pretty because you were making an observation based on physical appearance. You thought it was a compliment. But in my world, in the world I've built, and the men I surround myself with, being called pretty is an emasculation. It suggests weakness. It suggests that your power comes from appearance rather than capability." "I understand," I said quietly. "I apologize." "Apologize later," he interrupted. "Right now, I want you to understand why your words were dangerous." He stood and came around his desk, leaning against it in front of me. "Those men tonight, the ones who watched you watching me, they were evaluating me. They were asking themselves if I was still the leader they thought I was. When you called me pretty, you gave them ammunition. You gave them doubt." "I didn't mean to," I whispered. "Intention doesn't matter," Dominic said. "Results matter. Consequences matter. You've learned a lesson tonight about the power of words. Whether you actually believed what you said is irrelevant. What matters is how it was perceived." He was right. I understood that now. Words had consequences in this world, and I'd been reckless with mine. "From this point forward," Dominic continued, "you're going to learn how to navigate my world properly. You're going to understand hierarchy, respect, and the careful dance of power that keeps everything balanced." He stepped closer. "And perhaps, if you prove yourself adequately, I might teach you other things as well." There was something in his tone that made my skin prickle with electricity. This was no longer punishment. This was something else entirely. Something dangerous and compelling and impossible to resist. "What kind of things?" I asked. Dominic smiled then, and it was different from his usual cold expression. There was something almost tender in it, something that suggested he wasn't entirely immune to whatever was happening between us. "Things you're not ready for yet," he said quietly, "but perhaps you will be, given time." The following week transformed my understanding of Dominic Russo completely. He began deliberately educating me about his world, not to threaten me, but to help me understand it. He took me to see the community center he funded in his old neighborhood, where kids from broken homes learned to read and dream beyond their circumstances. He showed me the scholarship program he'd created, the medical clinic serving people without insurance, the halfway house where former addicts found recovery. "You think I'm a monster," he said as we stood in the gymnasium where children played basketball. "That's what the news tells you. That's what the streets say. But you don't know anything about me, do you? You saw a face and made a judgment." I felt something crack inside my chest. "Why are you showing me this?" "Because I'm going to teach you that there's more to people than what meets the eye," he said, turning to face me, "including me. And perhaps, if you're capable of learning, I might teach you a few other things as well." That night, at dinner in his penthouse, he told me about his past in detail, how he'd grown up poor in the same neighborhoods he now funded, how his father had abandoned him and his mother, leaving them with nothing but debt and despair, how he'd clawed his way out of nothing by any means necessary, eventually taking control of an operation he'd initially only worked for. "Money became power," he explained, swirling wine between his fingers, "and power became a way to protect the people I'd grown up with. I'm not asking for your forgiveness. I'm not a good man, Isabella, but I'm not the caricature the media created either." I realized then that this was the real consequence he'd promised, not punishment in the traditional sense, but exposure. He was forcing me to see him as a complete human being, complex and flawed and impossibly compelling. The second day, he took me shopping. When I protested, he simply smiled and said, "Consider it payment for your time. Pick whatever you want. I emerged with a single black dress, elegant and understated, refusing to indulge in the excess he offered. He looked almost proud. That evening, he held a business meeting with his inner circle. He wanted me to observe. I watched as he conducted himself with such authority, such measured control, that I found myself genuinely captivated. He wasn't loud or aggressive. He was quiet and deliberate, and yet every man in that room hung on his every word. Afterward, he found me on the balcony. "Did you see?" he asked, coming to stand beside me. "That's not the face of a pretty boy. That's leadership. That's power," I corrected, but there was no bite to my words. "Power is respect," he replied, "and respect is earned through fear only until it becomes something else. Once these men understand that I would die for them, that I've built all of this for them, the fear becomes loyalty." On the third day, the mask slipped for the first time. I'd gone to find him in his office to discuss my brother's situation, seeking confirmation the debt was truly forgiven. I found him sitting in the dark, a tumbler of bourbon in his hand, and for the first time, Dominic Russo looked genuinely human. He looked broken. "My mother died when I was 14, he said without preamble. "Couldn't afford the medication she needed. I swore that night that I would never be powerless again, that no one under my care would ever suffer from lack of resources." He looked at me then. "Your brother reminds me of myself at that age. Desperate, angry, making stupid choices." "He is," I whispered. "He was. So I'm giving him a second chance," Dominic said quietly. "Not because of you, because I understand what it means to have nothing." But he was lying, and I knew it. He was changing the rules of his game, bending his iron principles for a woman who'd called him pretty boy. For me. By day 4, something fundamental had changed between us. The power dynamic that had defined our interaction since that first night began to shift, twist, and transform into something neither of us had anticipated. Dominic no longer felt like my captor or my punisher. He felt like something far more dangerous. A possibility, a future, a choice I might actually want to make. We were in his kitchen at 2 a.m, and neither of us could sleep. We'd been talking for hours about everything and nothing. His favorite books, my dreams before reality intervened, the things that made us laugh, the things that kept us awake at night. The intimacy of those conversations was almost more intense than physical contact. "Why me?" I finally asked, sitting on the marble countertop while he made coffee with the precision of someone who'd done this alone 1,000 times. "You could have anyone. Women who wouldn't question you. Women who'd worship the ground you walk on." He paused, his hand suspended over the espresso machine. "That's exactly why not them," he said quietly. "I don't want worship. I've had that. It's hollow." He turned to face me, leaning against the counter. "You look at me, and you see both the beautiful man and the monster. You don't shy away from either version. That's rare, Isabella. That's extraordinary." "I see a man," I corrected, my voice barely above a whisper. "A complicated, flawed, incredibly powerful man who's trying to be better than the system that created him." He crossed the distance between us in 3 strides. His hand settled on either side of me, caging me against the counter. But there was nothing threatening about it. This was a man asking a question with his body, waiting for an answer he desperately needed to hear. "Tell me to stop," he whispered, his forehead nearly touching mine. "Tell me this is wrong, and I'll walk away." But I didn't. Instead, I reached up and pulled him closer, and when his lips met mine, it felt like coming home to a place I'd never been. It was tender and brutal and absolutely inevitable, like 2 opposing forces that could finally align. He kissed me like I was something precious, something worth protecting, something worth changing for. His hands moved to my waist, and I felt the controlled strength in every touch, every movement calculated to show me exactly how much I affected him. "You've already taught me my lesson," I murmured against his lips. "The most important one." "What's that?" he asked, pulling back just enough to look into my eyes. "That people are more than the worst thing they've done. That growth is possible. That love—" I stopped myself, but it was too late. He'd heard it. His expression shifted, softened, and for a moment, the dangerous Mafia boss completely disappeared, leaving only a man who looked at me like I'd given him something he thought he'd lost forever. "Say it again," he demanded, but his voice was almost vulnerable. "I'm falling in love with you," I whispered, even though I know I shouldn't, even though I know this is complicated and dangerous and probably going to destroy me. He kissed me again, deeper this time, with more intensity, like he was trying to pour his own feelings into the kiss, since he couldn't seem to speak them aloud. The 5th day brought the reckoning neither of us had anticipated. His men came to the penthouse early in the morning, urgent and tense. Dominic took the call in his office while I pretended to sleep, but I heard every word through the intercom he'd accidentally left active. "The Russians are moving on our territory," his lieutenant said, voice tight with stress. "They've taken 2 warehouses. They're testing us, Don. If we don't respond immediately, we look weak." I heard Dominic's exhale, the sound of a man grappling with demons. "Give me an hour." I was dressed and waiting when he emerged from his office. He was different now. The businessman and the lover were gone, replaced by the ruthless operator. His suit was darker, his expression colder. His entire demeanor shifted to something that made my skin prickle with fear. "You're leaving," I said. It wasn't a question. "Business," he replied, and there was no softness in his voice anymore, the kind that requires solutions that would destroy the progress I've made with you. "Then don't go," I said desperately. "Let someone else handle it. If I don't respond, people die," he said flatly. "Not just my people, innocent people in neighborhoods that depend on me to keep the violence at a manageable level. If the Russians move in unopposed, the chaos will be immeasurable. So you kill them instead." "So I remind them that there are consequences for challenging me," he corrected. "There's a difference, though I don't expect you to understand it." But I did understand. That was the problem. I understood that Dominic was trapped between the man he wanted to be and the man the world had forced him to become, that his capacity for love was real, but so was his responsibility to the empire he'd built. "What if you didn't?" I asked, the idea forming even as I spoke. "What if you stepped away? Let someone else lead while I play house with you and pretend my world doesn't exist?" His voice carried an edge of anger, but it wasn't directed at me. It was directed at the situation, at the unfairness of it all. That's not an option for men like me. The moment I show weakness, the moment I indicate that I'm distracted or divided, every enemy I've ever made will move against me. And they'll move against you, against your brother, against everyone I've ever cared about. Before I could respond, he moved toward me and cupped my face in his hands. The gesture was so tender it broke my heart. "This week was a gift," he said quietly. "A moment outside of reality where I could pretend to be someone else. But that's all it was. A moment. My world is waiting, and it doesn't care about my feelings or my desire for redemption." "That's not true," I said fiercely. "You have a choice. You always have a choice." "So do you," he replied. "When I leave here, you can forget me. You can go back to your normal life, your safe job, your ordinary existence. Or," he paused, and I could see the war playing out across his features, "or you can choose to stay with me, knowing that this is who I am, knowing that danger will always find you, knowing that my world will demand sacrifices you can't even imagine." "I want to stay," I said immediately. "Don't answer now," he commanded gently. "Answer me when I come back. Answer me when you've had time to think about what that truly means." He left within minutes, and I was alone in that penthouse with nothing but time, and the growing realization that I might have fallen in love with a man who couldn't choose me without destroying everything he'd built. The hours after he left were agony. I had access to news feeds and police scanners, and I watched the reports come in with increasing horror. Violence in the warehouse district, an explosion that took out a Russian supply line, gunfire reported near the docks. It was all coded language, but the meaning was crystal clear. Dominic was at war. I spent the night pacing the penthouse, my phone in my hand, desperate to call him, but knowing he was in no position to answer. I tried to imagine him in that environment, surrounded by death and violence, making impossible decisions about life and death. The man who'd held me tenderly just hours before was out there becoming the monster everyone said he was. Around midnight, the news broke. A body had been found, one of the Russian operatives who'd been trying to move into Dominic's territory. The death was brutal, and obviously a message. But Dominic had sent a different message too. He'd been precise, calculated, surgical in his response. He'd eliminated the threat without taking the conflict to the streets, without collateral damage. He'd shown restraint. He'd proved that he could wield his power with purpose, rather than rage. By 3 a.m, I heard the elevator. He emerged from it looking like he'd walked through hell. His suit was torn in one place. Blood stained his cuff. His hair was disheveled, his jaw dark with stubble, and his eyes held a depth of weariness that made me ache. "You're still here," he said, his voice rough with exhaustion and something else. Relief, maybe, or hope. "Of course I'm still here," I replied, moving toward him. "I told you I wanted to stay. You didn't have time to think. You didn't—" "I don't need time," I interrupted. "I know what I want. I want you, all of you, the dangerous parts and the tender parts and every complicated thing in between." He pulled me into his arms, and I felt him shake slightly. From exhaustion, adrenaline, or emotion, I couldn't determine. We held each other in the darkness of his penthouse, suspended above the city, two people trying to make an impossible relationship work in a world that wanted to destroy us. "I killed a man tonight," he said quietly into the darkness. First time in 3 years. I'd been trying to move away from that, trying to run my operation with less blood on my hands. "But you did it anyway," I said, understanding the weight of that admission. "I did it to protect you," he replied, "to prove that I would, to prove that nothing, not my principles, not my goals, not my desire to be better, will ever matter more than your safety." "That's not a lesson," I whispered. "That's just love. For men like me, they're the same thing," he said, and I heard the resignation in his voice. "Love is proving you'd burn the world down for someone. It's showing that you'll do whatever it takes to protect them." I turned to face him in the darkness. "Then teach me to be strong enough to deserve that kind of love. Teach me to be worthy of a man who's willing to carry all that darkness so I don't have to." The final days of the week took on a surreal quality. Dominic had essentially moved me into his world permanently, making it clear that the arrangement wasn't temporary. My manager at the hotel called in a panic. Dominic had purchased the entire establishment, claiming he wanted to invest in real estate. In reality, he was buying my job security, ensuring that I'd always have a reason to stay if I wanted one. But more significantly, he began introducing me to aspects of his business that he'd deliberately kept hidden. Not the violence. He was protective enough to shield me from that, but the legitimate operations, the import-export business, the construction company, the real estate holdings spread throughout the city and beyond. I began to understand that Dominic's empire was far more complex than the simplified version the media portrayed. He didn't just run an illegal operation. He ran an entire network of businesses, legitimate and otherwise, connected by threads of loyalty and mutual benefit. "I want to buy your brother into a partnership with me," he told me one evening as we reviewed financial documents in his office. "Nothing illegal, nothing dangerous. A legitimate construction business. He has natural talent, you know. I could see it when he was desperate and angry. Imagine what he could accomplish if he had resources and direction. He'd be working for you," I pointed out gently. "He'd be working with me," Dominic corrected. "There's a difference. He'd be part of my legitimate operations. Part of the future I'm building where I don't have to explain myself to anyone because everything I do is legal and respectable." I realized then that this was his real goal. Not legitimacy for its own sake, but legitimacy so he could stop making the kind of choices that required violence. He was building a path to redemption, not for the world, but for me, so that he could be the man I'd asked him to be on that first night. "I need to ask you something," I said, closing the document folder. "And I need you to be honest with me." He set down his pen and gave me his full attention. "Always. Have you truly changed? Or are you just changing for me? Because if it's the latter, I need to know now. I can't be responsible for transforming you. That has to come from you." He was quiet for a long moment, considering the question with the seriousness it deserved. "I think the answer is both," he said finally. "Change is difficult. Change is terrifying. I might never have taken this path if you hadn't forced me to see myself through your eyes, but now that I'm on it, I'm discovering that I actually want to be this version of myself. I want to build something that doesn't require violence. I want to create opportunities instead of taking them. I want to be the man you believe I can be." He stood and pulled me to my feet, then took my hands in his. "But I need to be clear about something. The man who killed for you last week will always exist inside me. The version of me that will do absolutely anything to protect you, that will cross every line and break every rule if it means keeping you safe. That man is permanent. He's not a facade. He's part of me as much as my capacity for love is." "I know," I said, "and I accept that, even though it terrifies you sometimes. Especially because it terrifies me sometimes," I replied. "It means you're real. It means you have depths and darkness. It means you're human. On the 7th day, Dominic took me back to the warehouse where we'd first met. I was confused until he explained, "I want to erase that moment. I want to replace it with something better." He'd transformed the space. Soft lighting, tables laden with food, flowers everywhere. His men stood at attention, and he led me to the center of the room. The moment felt momentous, and my heart began to race with anticipation and hope. He dropped to one knee. "I should do this properly," Dominic said, his voice carrying through the warehouse. "I should have courted you traditionally. I should have wooed you with flowers and poetry instead of threats and contracts. But I'm not a traditional man, and you're not a traditional woman. So I'm asking you now, in front of my men, in the place where you showed me that even the most powerful person in the room is still just human, will you marry me?" I was crying before he'd even finished the question, and the answer tumbled out of me without hesitation. "Yes, yes, absolutely yes." He slipped the ring onto my finger, a diamond that caught the light and sparkled like liquid fire, and when he kissed me, his men erupted into cheers. In that moment, surrounded by dangerous men in the place where my fate had been sealed, I felt completely safe, completely loved, completely home. The 8th day brought an unexpected visitor. As Dominic and I were having breakfast in the penthouse, his security informed him that Viktor Petrov, the head of the Russian organization that had challenged him, was here to meet, alone, unarmed, asking to negotiate. "Bring him up," Dominic said, and I felt him tense slightly. This could be a trap. This could be anything. Viktor Petrov was nothing like what I expected. He was older, maybe 60, with gray threading through his dark hair, and a face that had seen considerable hardship. He was impeccably dressed, but there was something almost graceful about the way he carried himself, something that suggested we were looking at another man trying to survive in a world that demanded brutality. "Dominic," Viktor said, acknowledging him with a respectful nod. "I came to acknowledge defeat and to propose a truce." "A truce?" Dominic's voice was dangerous and controlled. "You moved on my territory. You tested my patience. You got good men killed." "Yes," Viktor admitted without trying to excuse himself. "I did these things, and you responded with precision instead of rage. You proved that you're not just another thug fighting for scraps. You're something more dangerous, a thinking man, a man with vision." He glanced at me, and understanding flickered across his features. "Ah, so that's what changed you." "Don't," Dominic said, his tone a clear warning. But Viktor simply smiled sadly. "I'm not here to threaten you. I'm here to tell you that I recognize what you're trying to build, and I respect it enough not to interfere." He pulled out a document. "I'm consolidating my operations in 3 territories and leaving the East completely to you. In exchange, I need safe passage for my people and assurance that my legitimate businesses won't be targeted." Dominic studied the document for a long moment. "Why the sudden benevolence?" "I have a daughter," Viktor said quietly. "She's about your age," he gestured toward me, "and she found a man who loves her. I spent decades in this business trying to protect her, to give her everything I could. But all I succeeded in doing was creating a world she wanted nothing to do with. Last month, she told me that if I didn't change, I'd lose her entirely." He looked directly at Dominic. "I'm not changing fast enough to make a real difference, but I'm changing. Don't make the same mistake I did. Don't let the business consume the personal." After Viktor left, Dominic was quiet for a long time. I found him on the balcony, staring out at the city below. "He was right," Dominic said without preamble. "I could have executed an operation of revenge instead of negotiation. The old me would have. But you didn't," I pointed out. "Because of you," he replied. "You've taught me that strength isn't about how much pain you can inflict. It's about how much you can absorb while still choosing mercy. It's about understanding that there's always a choice, even when the world tells you there isn't." He turned to me and pulled me into his arms. "You were right that night in the warehouse, when you said someone should tell me the truth. Everyone around me was too afraid to do it. But you did. You called me pretty, which was ridiculous and perfect, and it changed my entire trajectory. I'm not responsible for your redemption," I reminded him gently. "No," he agreed, "but you made it possible. You showed me that transformation doesn't require perfection. It just requires the willingness to be different, to choose love over fear, mercy over revenge, building over destroying. The final day of my 6-month contract arrived with the understanding that it wasn't an ending at all. It was a beginning. Dominic had scheduled a meeting that morning with his board of legitimate business operators, and he brought me along. I watched as he restructured his operations, dividing his enterprises into completely legal operations and placing trusted lieutenants in positions of real power within those sectors. I'm stepping back from direct involvement in the aspects of my business that exist in gray areas, he announced. I'm not naive enough to think I can completely disappear from those operations overnight, but I'm committed to a transition plan. My goal is to be completely legitimate within 5 years. His team looked shocked. It was an incredible announcement. The most powerful crime boss in the region essentially dismantling his own operation. The territory I control will be split among my most trusted associates, Dominic continued. This isn't weakness. This is evolution. This is recognizing that empires built on violence eventually consume themselves, but empires built on legitimate power, on respect earned through business acumen rather than fear, those can last. Later that evening, we were back in the warehouse where he'd proposed, and I understood why he'd chosen this location. It was full circle, where I'd insulted him and set everything in motion, where he'd taught me that people are more than their worst actions, where he'd shown me that even the most powerful person in the room can choose to be vulnerable. I need to ask you something, I said as we stood in the center of the space. Now that the 6 months are over, now that you don't have me as an employee, do you still want me? He laughed, and it was such a genuine, warm sound that I felt myself relax. Isabella, I don't think you understand what you've done to me. You walked into my world and challenged me. You forced me to become someone better, not because I had to, but because I wanted to be worthy of you. That's not something that ends when a contract concludes. That's something that lasts forever. He kissed me then, tenderly and completely, and I felt the truth of his words in every touch. This wasn't the kiss of a man following orders or teaching a lesson. This was the kiss of a man who'd found his path forward, who'd discovered that love was stronger than violence, that mercy was more powerful than vengeance. I have something for you, he said, pulling a small box from his pocket. Inside was a key, an actual, physical key. This is to a house I've bought. Nothing pretentious. Nothing that screams underworld connections. A simple, beautiful home where I can be just a man. Where we can be just a couple. It's in your name. Completely your property. If you ever want to leave, you can, without losing your protection or your security. I stared at the key, understanding the profound gesture it represented. He was giving me an exit, even as he was asking me to stay. He was proving that his love came with choice, not chains. I'm not going anywhere, I said, slipping the key into my pocket. But I love that you'd let me. We left the warehouse hand in hand as the sun set over the city. Behind us, we were leaving the story of the pretty boy and the woman who'd challenged him. Ahead of us was something far more beautiful, the story of a man choosing redemption, a woman choosing faith, and 2 people building something that had nothing to do with crime syndicates or power structures or revenge. It was just love. Complicated, dangerous, beautifully messy love. And that was the real lesson we'd both learned. If this story captured your heart the way these 2 characters captured each other's, I'd absolutely love to hear about it. What did you think? Which moment hit you hardest? Drop your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more intense emotional narratives that will keep you on the edge of your seat.